All right, we're back on the Top 25 Voter Pod. With me, as always, is one of my fellow Top 25 voters, and that is Mr. John Werner. John, how you doing?
Doing great, Brice. Hey, that hat's become a fixture, it seems like now.
You know that I like to go play basketball at lunchtime, and I have the bedhead going on. Why take a shower before you're going to go play basketball?
I gotcha.
So with us also is our good friend Danny Davis from the Austin American-Statesman. Danny, so pleased to have you on. Danny's been with the Statesman since 2007. Among other things, covers the Texas women as their beat writer. But Danny, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah.
We'll talk all about how fun voting in the AP poll is.
We'll get into that. I know you mentioned the other day that you felt like it was the bane of your existence. Obviously, it's one of those things that can be a little tedious, but first I want to address something that happened in the AP women's poll this week. So history was made from a Texas perspective, Texas, the state, not UT, although certainly you could include them in this. And it's not the kind of history you want to make. So for the first time in the history of the AP Top 25 women's poll, no Texas teams were ranked. I wrote a column about it earlier this week. What do you guys make of this? I mean, is this just kind of a temporary hiccup, or is this a trend? I mean, has the level of play in the Lone Star State slipped that much? Danny, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of look at it a couple ways. I mean, first, I think a lot of people deserve some applause for keeping Texas, the state, ranked for as long as it is, whether or not you want to go back to Jody and what she did in the 80s at Texas, obviously Marcia Sharp at Texas Tech, and then obviously, we don't need to talk about Kim. I mean, what she did these 20 years at Baylor, however long she was there, was incredible. And, she kind of was keeping that streak alive these last 2 decades. Texas has definitely had some good teams, but they have not been consistent that entire time, and Baylor definitely has. So when you have that, it just takes a couple bad years or a bad season or a couple bad weeks by some of these top tier teams, because TCU is not carrying its weight. Texas Tech currently is not carrying its weight. Those lower tier teams, the Rices, the Houstons, Texas States, even if they're having really good seasons. I mean, I know Rice has had a couple good seasons, but they've really struggled to even be getting votes because they're mid-major. And unless you're a voter in the state, you really don't know about them. So it's really tough for some of those mid-majors to get that, traction. So you need Baylor, you need Texas to be doing all the heavy lifting. And Baylor had that stretch where they had those, those two straight losses, and that really hurt them in the poll because they were kind of near the bottom. Texas losing to Texas Tech did not help their case. So if you have the big dogs not, doing all the heavy lifting, that streak is going to come to an end. But it just does kind of say, just how dominant a Baylor has been these last 2 decades, what Texas has done during that stretch, and that should be applauded. But, those teams are going to have to go back and, do the heavy lifting if Texas wants to start another streak as a state.
Yeah, no doubt. John, what do you say?
I think it's just kind of a blip, really. Just kind of a, Texas, Baylor, they've lost a few games lately, and they're not that far out of the poll. I think they'll, at least one or two of those teams will be back pretty soon. I would guess Texas will probably be back this next week.
Right. So Longhorns get, as we record this podcast on a Thursday, Longhorns are coming off a big win really last night against a ranked OU team. And that's 2 in a row. Who do they have next, Danny?
They have Oklahoma State on Saturday, so a rematch of one of their 2 conference losses. And I will say, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, Texas should be ranked. I think it's absurd that Texas is not ranked. And I think that highlights one of the problems I do have with the AP poll is, a lot of it's a national poll. And that's the problem you have with some of these national polls is a lot of these national polls aren't, and this goes for me voting for a team like Maryland or, a team like UCLA or something like that, you don't see the team. You just kind of see the losses. You don't see the context. You don't see the, standings. You just kind of see the wins and losses. And you just see Texas lost to Texas Tech. You got to boot them, and you don't take any context into that. You just see Baylor lost to a Oklahoma State team. You don't see that Oklahoma State just got hot for a little bit, and all of a sudden you're just punishing them for losing to Oklahoma State. Like, there's a lot of context lost in these national polls, and I'm sorry, Texas is probably the best team in the Big 12, and I think it's silly that they're not ranked because they lost to Texas Tech in Lubbock in what was Texas Tech's Super Bowl. Not that that's not a bad loss, not that Texas Tech shouldn't be, celebrating that, and Texas shouldn't be kicking themselves for that loss, but I don't think that loss should kick Texas from the poll, especially when this was the number 3 team in the preseason poll. They were voted into that spot because of Rory Harmon. They got off to a slow start because Rory wasn't playing, but now she's playing. This is the Texas team people expected. And all of a sudden, a team with a top 15 net ranking all of a sudden isn't ranked because they lost to Texas Tech. I mean, come on. That just doesn't make sense to me. And you probably make the same arguments for a Baylor, maybe deserving a spot towards the end of the poll, in the 20 range and stuff like that. But unfortunately, a lot of these polls and awards and stuff like that, when they're voted on nationally, they're regionally biased. And maybe I'd probably give the benefit of the doubt a little bit more to Big 12 teams than if I was an ACC writer or something like that. But that's just kind of how these things go. And that's just Texas should be ranked. That's just my long.
Yeah, no, I get that. And honestly, one of the things I did say in my column, a little bit to John's point about it being a blip, was that I do think like the Longhorns will be back there pretty soon. I mean, if they beat Oklahoma State, you're talking about three game winning streak, and they were 25 just a week ago. That feels like they would climb back in. And if Baylor can get hot again, certainly they can get back in the poll. But I will say, speaking as a voter, I do get it when teams lose and you drop them. I mean, that's what you got to do. And I also understand what, Danny, you're saying about the context of it all. I mean, losses are inevitable. And I think one of the points I made in my column was just the women's game right now has more parity than it's had maybe ever. I think it more closely mirrors the men's game than perhaps any time in history. And there used to be sort of the blue bloods at the top with UConn and Tennessee and those programs, Stanford maybe, and now it's just the talent is much more evenly distributed. And you still have some blue bloods, but they can lose too. So back to the Texas women. So Danny, you brought them up and mentioned that they're arguably the best team in the Big 12. Certainly they're tied for the lead now after that win over OU. They've been up and down though. I mean, they have 6 losses, kind of we were talking about it on Sunday, you and I, just about not always knowing which team was going to show up for either Texas or Baylor. So Vic Schaefer, though, has taken these Longhorns to the Elite Eight each of his first 2 years. So what are the odds that happens again, that they make another deep run in the tournament?
I think I've said this a couple times. I know I mentioned it yesterday. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Texas makes it to the Final Four this year. I also wouldn't be surprised they lost in the second round. I mean, they have been a little erratic this year. The last 2 years, Vic has managed to get everyone on the right page in March, and they've gotten hot, especially that 2021 team that came in as a 6th seed and got to the Elite Eight. I mean, I think last year was a little bit more expected because that was a team that got really, really hot going into the postseason. So I think what Texas fans and Vic are banking on is that this team that has a lot of fresh faces this season. They're playing 4 transfers. They're starting 3 transfers, and then their first person off the bench is another transfer. Their second person off the bench is a freshman. And they have another freshman who's a heavy rotation player. So they have a lot of new faces. And I think Vic is just hoping that by the time March gets around, this team is gelled. They're kind of, feeling each other out, feeling the way he wants them to play, especially defensively, and that they can, get hot again. We talk about how erratic they've been, and that's true. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think you kind of have to throw 3 of those losses out. They count. You can't say that the loss to UConn didn't happen. You can't say the loss to Marquette and Louisville didn't happen, but it matters that Rory wasn't playing in those games, and that this is not the same team without their All-American candidate point guard running the show. Since she plays 40 minutes a game, is probably their best defender, and is obviously their offensive catalyst. So, but Rory was on the floor for that Oklahoma State loss. She was on the floor for that Texas Tech loss. So this team can lose with her in the lineup. They have played a lot worse on the road than they have at home, although they played well this past Sunday at Baylor, even though that's, a 90-minute drive from Austin. It's not that huge of a road game, but that's still hostile grounds. So they played really well at home. They've, beat the snot out of, some ranked Big 12 teams at home, and but they're going to have to go on the road at some point to prove themselves, and we'll see if they can finally find some consistency on the road. Because even last night, Vic was kind of getting made fun of by the media, because he came into the post-game press conference after they beat number 14 Oklahoma by 20 points, never trailed them. Vic had a laundry list of things he was upset about, and it was like, all right, man, enjoy this team. But I mean, I guess that's what makes a good coach. You can nitpick about even a blowout win. So we'll see if they can find that consistency and just kind of gel. But I have a feeling they'll probably be, in form and what people are expecting Texas to be come March.
Yeah, I was impressed with them on Sunday, and certainly Rory is, one of the best point guards in the country, I would say. Not a great 3-point shooter, but I don't know that she has to be for this team. I mean, they have other shooters, and she can get to the rim. She can really facilitate the offense. I mean, she's fun to watch. Another guy who's fun to watch is Keyonte George. Let's talk about the Baylor men, Johnny.
Right.
They're on a good streak now. They've gotten onto a 5-game winning streak after that 0-3 start to the Big 12.
Right.
And one of those wins came on Monday over the defending national champion Kansas Jayhawks on Big Monday. So what has been just kind of the key to this winning streak for Baylor?
Well, I think the biggest thing is they're playing much better defense. During those 3 losses, they were giving up an average of 87 points per game. The 5 wins, they're giving up an average of 67 points a game. So a 20-point difference in defense. That's
funny how that works.
Right. Now, I will say, the teams they played, Iowa State, TCU, and K-State, they're 3 of the best offensive teams in the league too. So, you're probably going to give up more points to those teams anyway. But other than that, they've continued to rebound really well. Their guards are both Adam Flagler, Keyonte George are both really good rebounders at the guard position, and I think they're moving the ball around a lot better. They're finding the open man. They're making the extra pass, and Keyonte's obviously had a couple of huge games: 32 points at West Virginia, 27 at Texas Tech. But I think he's also become kind of a marked man now. A lot of teams are putting their best defender on him. So, but that's opened up things for LJ Cryer and Adam Flagler. And on Monday night, Langston Love had a huge second half, 11 points, made some good defensive plays. I thought he made the most critical plays in the game in the second half. So yeah, they've got it rolling pretty well. And, it's going to be tough. I mean, 3 teams, K-State, Iowa State, TCU, tied 6-2. Then you got 3 more at 5-3. So it's going to go down to the wire. I think all those teams are going to get really high seeds in the NCAA tournament.
Except they're going to beat up on each other, so that might hurt the seeding.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going a little off book here, guys. Just warning you, but Danny kind of opened up the avenue for this. So John, you vote in the AP men's poll.
Mm-hmm.
Danny and I vote in the AP women's poll, hence the name of the podcast. So again, Danny, you kind of hit on this, but when you guys are voting each week, what are you kind of looking at? How much are you looking at scores during the week and games and trying to keep abreast of, like what you talked about, Danny, the context of it all? And so, I mean, what's just kind of the method to your madness when you're voting? Danny, I'll start with you.
I mean, obviously, I keep track of scores during the week. I follow a decent amount of really talented, good reporters that cover women's basketball. So, especially nationally. So they keep me up to date, and you try to keep track of, especially what's happening with the top tier teams. I would say the majority of my work is probably done on Sunday. When Doug sends out, the email saying, here's what happened with the top 25 teams, obviously go over that. Then I go over, net rankings, standings, some of the other things I like to look at. Some context stuff like, how much am I weighing this loss against who? Was this person out, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Sometimes you look at a score and it's like, they lost by 20 points. Why did that happen? So you try to read into, okay, three starters were out, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you don't want to ding them that much. Sometimes you go back and look at a loss that, like Oklahoma State, for example. When Texas lost to Oklahoma State a couple weeks ago, that looked awful on Texas. And I think I dropped them from my poll at that point. That maybe one of the weeks I didn't vote for them. But then the next week when they went and beat Baylor, and then were competitive against Iowa State, you're like, okay, that loss isn't as bad. I can go back and look at that and be like, okay, it's still not a great loss for Texas, but that's not as terrible as I thought it was. So you try to, go back and re-examine some of the previous losses. Maybe if a team had a huge win against a team that's kind of fallen off, you don't, Texas fans just talking about football, that Notre Dame game when they beat Notre Dame, 2016, everyone thought that was the best win in the world, and Notre Dame fell off and it wasn't that great. So you try to, re-examine some stuff. Obviously, you can't do that for all 25 teams you vote for. I mean, that's at this point in the season, every team has like 20 games in their schedule. You can't go that in depth. So, you just kind of take some bits and pieces, some of its vibes, move around the poll. I usually do my poll on Sunday night, submit it. I get up on Monday morning, usually before I wake my son up, get him ready for school, and then I re-go over it just to make sure that there isn't anything that I didn't like. Sometimes there's like a team like I really wanted to vote this team higher, and so I'll readjust and resubmit and go about my business. So usually I wouldn't say I spend 48 hours on this thing, or it's something I'm devoted my entire week to, but it's definitely something I spend, an hour or so on Sunday, and then a few minutes on Monday just to make sure I didn't screw anything up, or make any outrageous votes or something like that. Because every once in a while, something like that will happen. Like, oh shoot, I clicked on the wrong team. I need to make sure I don't hit send on that.
Yeah. It sounds very similar to what I do, but John, how about you?
Yeah, I'll definitely look at scores, strength of schedule, who they've played lately. Like Kansas last week, they were number 2. They lost an overtime game at K-State. But then you look at that 83-60 loss to TCU at Allen Fieldhouse, where they hardly ever lose. It was Bill Self's second worst loss there. So I think you have to drop them a few more slots when you lose that big at home. Yeah, I'm kind of like Danny. I spent about an hour doing it on Sunday night. And I'll tell you that usually about the top 20 are not too hard to figure out. It's those last 5 that I probably spend the most time on. I'll usually put like somebody from a smaller conference in that top 5. And in that last 5, like College of Charleston or Florida Atlantic, or maybe a New Mexico, somebody with a really good record, that's hasn't got a lot of recognition. And at the same time, I will say, a team like Kentucky or North Carolina, who frankly have been disappointments this year, I'm less likely to put them in one of those last 2 or 3 spots, with 6 or 7 losses. Yeah. I think I would rather put a team from a smaller conference who's not getting a whole lot of recognition. But yeah, really, there's a whole lot of different angles you have to think about. And but it's pretty fun to do.
So I would say I there's a lot of things, a lot of common threads here. I mean, I would say I spend about the same amount of time that you guys do, and I also work on it on Sunday night. Um, as Danny said, we have, just how the sausage is made a little bit. We have uh Doug Feinberg from the AP sends out the women's stuff about how each team fared that week. Personally, I tend to not drop a team if they haven't lost a game that week. So, like, that sometimes can simplify your poll. Now, is that a hard and fast rule? Not necessarily, because if there are teams that gain a really, really impressive win, um, I think I want to say I flipped Utah and Notre Dame this week in the poll. Um, Trying to remember the context behind all of that, but um, anyway, you can climb over another team if I think that you've really accomplished something great. Um, I mean, I do. I don't really care how other voters are ranking teams. I don't really look at that. Um, I do look at one of the little metrics I look at. I don't look much at the net ranking, but maybe I should. But I do look at record against other ranked teams, which that probably is reflected in a net ranking. Um, and for instance, like, I think the LSU women are probably pretty good. And I've got them about sixth in the country, and they're what, third, I want to say, Danny, overall. Uh, that said, they've played one top 25 team all year long. Baylor's played seven. And it's hard to know just how good LSU is. And the one they played was in conference play. They didn't play any in non-conference. Um, so, I've got them ranked a little bit lower just because of that. Now they're still undefeated. And I think Angel Reese is one of the best players in the country. And they still will be a hard out for somebody in the NCAA tournament. But those are kind of the things that I look at when I'm making my votes, because I do think that strength of schedule should be an important metric, so. And personally, I don't mind doing it. I told Danny the other day, the bane of my existence is the voting on the Big 12 Player of the Week stuff, just because you have a very small window of time to do that. So I like to have a little bit more leeway. Anyway,
I commend
finally,
you.
guys, I want to talk about yeah, go ahead.
I commend you for openly saying that you have LSU 6, because I would imagine their head coach still has your phone number. And
She does still have my phone number.
Hunt you down.
She sees all, Danny.
She fortunately does not call or text like she used to, but I will say I texted her once her first season last year. I mean, we've conversed a couple of times, but she had a girl named Cherry on her team, a last name Cherry, and she had a really good game at the start of the season, and I think LSU won their first game under Mulkey. And I texted Kim and I said, "Congratulations on the first win at LSU." I said, "That said, if I see a headline that says Cherry's in the doghouse, I'm not going to be surprised at that." And Kim is, if nothing else, Kim tends to have a pretty good sense of humor. And I was expecting more of a reaction. All she did was just text back and said, "Thanks, Brice." So there you go. I almost thought, I wonder if Cherry's already in the doghouse. So anyway.
Just because of the name.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, "Oh my gosh, how did I get a Cherry on this team?" So guys, this weekend we have the Big 12 SEC Challenge in the men's game. That is what that's called, right, John?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's a brief detour from the conference schedule. There's a lot of intriguing matchups. Certainly historically, Kansas Kentucky is, a matchup of two blue bloods. Now Kansas is on a little bit of a slide. How much do you think these coaches get into these conference battles? Pac-12 does some with the Big 12 as well. And do they have any lasting benefits beyond just bragging rights?
Well, I know Scott Drew loves it because his teams always do well in these. I mean, as you know, SEC Challenge, Big East, Pac-12, you name it. They've got pretty remarkable records in them. And I think his teams really get up for him because I think they know the importance of them. At the end of the year when the NCAA tournament committee is looking at the resumes and, you see, late January, early February, you see a win over another really good conference team. And I think, he lets his players know the importance of it. And I also think that, I think they kind of like stepping outside a conference, maybe midway through. I think it kind of relieves the pressure a little bit. Baylor always looks pretty relaxed and loose in these games. And I think it's just kind of their approach to it. And they normally play pretty well in them. So I know Scott Drew really likes it. I don't know about the other coaches, really, how much they like it. But I would think in general, it's kind of like a breath of fresh air in the middle of conference play.
Danny, what do you say?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where it is kind of a nice little break. Obviously, I think the women do theirs in December, whenever that Big 12 SEC deal was. But at the end of the day, no one's hanging a banner, regardless of what happens this week. But I think if you're a team with tournament aspirations, you hope you get matched up with another team that will test you. But it's also something that Texas is playing Tennessee this weekend, and obviously for Texas fans, because of Rick coaching there, that there's a lot of intrigue there, and people will be happy to watch that game and hope that Texas wins. But if Texas loses, it's not the end of the world. I mean, you get dinged a couple spots in your rankings, and maybe lose a spot or two in the net, but you don't have to win this game. As opposed to Texas went out and lost to TCU this weekend. I mean, that would be a pretty big blow to them in the race for the conference championship. So, I mean, it's good. It's a nice little break in the middle of a long conference season. Hopefully your team is getting tested this weekend. You're not playing the last place team in the SEC or whatever. And then, you can take what you get from this and move on. But obviously if, Texas or Baylor wins by 30, that banner's not going up next weekend. You just kind of, mark that, learn from it and move on.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I do think there are bragging rights. I think that is part of it. I mean, certainly, John, you mentioned Scott Drew. Scott's a numbers guy. He always seems to have some at the holster,
Oh yeah,
and so
ready to draw.
If the Big 12 beats the SEC in this thing, I'm sure in one of his future press conferences he'll be like, well, the Big 12 went 7-3. But I would say it's more likely to be evenly split. I'm with you guys. I like just a brief little detour there. It's certainly more interesting than, let's say, the SEC football teams playing, the Sisters of the Poor in November. That little detour that they do in their conference season, that's never made any sense to me, but go figure. So anyway, that's a tale for another podcast. It's not football season anymore. So yeah, John, you'll be watching the Bears and the Hogs this weekend, correct? Yeah, that'll be fun. Old Southwest Conference rivals. Some of the old timers will get into that for sure. The Baylor women go to Lubbock. They had a midweek bye this week, Baylor did, and so they've had time to lick their wounds a little bit after that Texas loss. And then, Danny, you mentioned the Texas women play Oklahoma State this weekend, correct? So, yeah, the grind goes on, and we'll be there bringing it to you. But Danny, thanks so much for hopping on with us, man. We certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Danny.
Yeah, appreciate you all having me on. Hopefully this will not be my last stop on this pod.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
See you later.
See you.